If there was ever a smell or a scent in the Australian bush that typified what the bush meant, it's the smell of this, eucalyptus. And the early Australian painters knew that too. When they travelled abroad, the likes of Streeton and Roberts would take bags full of Australian eucalypts, nice and dry, and burn them in their studios to remind them of home. So for those guys, Australian gum, Australia. When I think of Australian icons, I don't think of meat pies, kangaroos and Holden cars. I think of these guys, Australian River red gum. Here today on the Macquarie River, just outside of Dubbo again yielding lots of subjects. But we're here today to really have a look at these guys here and the role they play in the river, but also the role they play artistically in the making of Australia. When Oxley first came down this river, a tree like this, which is probably a good 400 years old, would have already stood to be 200. It's trees like this that gave the first European painters here in Australia a real hard time. They had a difficult time in working out the angles and structure of such an informal tree when they were used to painting English trees in English settings which were very formal. It was really Hyson that brought the Australian gum tree into its own, painting it as a portrait more so than a piece in a landscape. A tree like this certainly would have given anybody a hard time to paint. Umbrellas, rosellas, bats, pythons, you name it. They've all at some stage lived in this tree. Now a tree this size really only starts developing hollows at between 100 and 200 years old. So a tree needs to be an established tree before it becomes housing for animals anyway. So they're an important part of the ecosystem structure of the river. Not only do they provide housing for land-based animals, but also aquatic wildlife too. The limbs fall off these trees and act as cover and homes for all sorts of fish, from yellowbellies and cod all the way down the system. That's born in one of these trees is going to survive. There's going to be a natural attrition rate, but unfortunately it's part of life. This is a little corella. It's just a little young one, just about ready to leave the nest, I'd say, but he's obviously fallen out of the tree before he could fly, and that's his final end. Whenever I'm painting underneath these trees, I'm always wary, and for good reason. They've got a reputation as being widowmakers. When these trees get under stress, they'll drop big limbs in order to try and conserve water. But those big limbs can fall at any point and any time, and they have got a reputation of killing people. It's a hardwood timber, so it's been sought after for many, many years for the building industry. Now, whether it's been bridge piers or sleepers for railway lines, fence posts, you name it, it's been pretty well utilised. But you can certainly see how the river red gum got its name. Look at the beautiful rich red colours in that timber.
don't have to be an artist to appreciate these old trees. Their individual characters almost talk to you, drawing you in. For me, there's nothing nicer than morning or afternoon light dancing amongst the twisted and knotted limbs and burls, creating mystery amongst the foliage. You almost expect to catch glimpses of May Gibbs's gumnut characters in the shadows that play against the light. These old gums have an ancientness about them that commands respect and admiration. If only they could tell their stories of history seen. Being hundreds of years old, they've seen the comings and goings of a nation.
One of the features of the river red gum that really attracts artists to them are these knurls. Now these knurls form over long periods of time, but what they actually are budding cells that reproduce and form these hard wooden structures. But they give the tree so much character, and artists have chased trees with these big knurls because of that character for many, many years, and still do. I love them. Unfortunately, wood turners also like them. They cut them off and make bowls out of them. What a shame. To me they're like the faces of an old person, you know, so much character. It's not that our colonial artists couldn't paint the gum tree, it's the fact that they couldn't draw the gum tree. They'd all been brought up and trained academically as studio painters and artists, mostly from Europe. Didn't have an understanding of how to cope with our gum trees. They hadn't done any outdoor work to speak of, so this is all very new territory to them. It was pre-Impressionists. The Impressionist movements in France were the ones that really developed the idea of going outdoors and being in the light and being in the open air, coining the phrase en plein air, which means to paint in the light. So this is all pre that era. So they're very much breaking new ground. So the humble results that they achieved were in their day something special.
A common mistake by beginner artists that are really keen to paint is that they forget before you can paint, you have to be able to draw, and draw well. Drawing is the fundamental to good painting. Without a good foundation, no amount of paint can ever make it better. I spent most of my life drawing. I love the directness and spontaneity of drawing. During my childhood, I wasn't influenced by books on Hyson and Streeton that most people are. In actual fact, we didn't have any of those books in my household. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I got to be introduced to those people. Now, in my household, I was brought up on the likes of Eric Jolliffe, who was a cartoonist at the time, and living in places like Lightning Ridge and Narrabri, he portrayed the characters and the scenery that I was familiar with. It was almost like he was depicting my home. And I used to pore over his magazines and comic books and reproduce his drawings, but particularly his gum trees. He captured those gum trees with a minimal amount of fuss, but the essence was there. Everything that Hyson was talking about, essence certainly is in the drawing, and Jolliffe for me captured that. And I copied and copied and copied his work. I went outdoors and I drew, and I still do. leads me to where I am today, drawing here on the beautiful river, Macquarie River, this lovely gum. In working from life, it's important for me not to try and capture every fiddly detail. The fiddly details are not what's important, it's the overall picture and the essence and the structure of the tree. If I wanted a photographic detailed picture, I'd sit and copy a photograph, but that just doesn't do it. It doesn't capture the atmosphere and the feeling of a tree. No, for me, photos are a complete no-no. To avoid that overworking of the picture or the painting, it's important to not stay in one place for too long. Staying in one place for too long tends to mean that you're focusing too much into the detail of that area, and it tends to make you want to overwork it. Keeping a loose approach to start with and refining it down as the painting or the drawing progresses means you're getting an overall picture all the time. I always find it important when I'm drawing these big gums, or anything for that matter, keep looking at the subject, and it's exactly the same when you're painting. The subject's there in front of you, the information's there in front of you. There's no need to guess and to make up what you think might be there. The subject's in front, use it. One thing that these big gums can teach you as an artist is the importance of reflected light. You only have to look at the underside of a big limb to notice that it's not the darkest part of it. Although the light source might be coming from above, the light is actually bouncing off the ground, picking up whatever ground colour there is there, and it's reflecting back to the underside of the limb. So in actual fact, the darkest part of the limb is the bit that is closest to your eye, in that the top is light, the bottom is light, and the little piece in between is usually the darkest section. And that gives the whole limb a roundness and a form. So it's important to keep an eye on those sort of things, because they are the things that make a painting work, that make a limb round and give it volume and form and heaviness, weight. When you're choosing a subject or a time of day to paint, particularly with these old big gums, I find the importance of the right light is essential. Midday light, especially in summertime, things are usually washed out and the minimum of shadows are cast, but early morning, late afternoon, you're getting lovely shadow forms underneath limbs, behind burls, and it creates lovely highlights to work with. They're the times of the day that subjects like this really come into their own, and that's the time of day when I like to be out, first thing or last light, capturing that lovely atmosphere. It's always a difficult thing to know when you've finished a picture. It's easy and it's tempting to keep working on it and finding more and more information, but that leads to a tighter and an overworked painting. It was Robert Henry that said, "A painting's never finished, it just stops at an interesting place." Meaning, you can keep working on it, sure, but it's not going to get better. It's going to reach a point where it's only going to be detrimental to the painting. So it's best left slightly unfinished than over-finished.
This is one of the things that really bugs me about people using the river. Recreational fishers and users of the river, more often than not, are very good and with their rubbish and take it with them. But you get the odd one that wants to do this, leave everything behind, even the household waste, dirty nappies, the lot. It's disgusting. They want to come down here and use this place because it is beautiful and pristine and ruin it for somebody else. Next time they come back down here, this will still be there unless somebody like myself cleans it up.
One of my favourite times of day to paint these big gums is late afternoon, when you're getting the trees in silhouette, so you're looking directly into the light. And walking directly into the light like that can be a difficult thing too at times. You're looking straight into the sun sometimes, which means that the retina in the pupil of your eye shuts down to try and compensate for that bright exposure. But in doing that, it also affects the way that you see tones and colour. So it's a bit of a tricky situation, but gee, the effects are worth it if you can really nail it. Working into the light with these big gums silhouettes the gum so that you're getting the structure and the form of the gum with just some beautiful little highlights along trunks and burls and a glitter of shine through leaves. It just makes a really magical type picture. If ever it was important to be wearing a hat with a good solid brim, it's during these situations. A good hat with a big solid brim allows a bit of shade over your eyes and allows your pupils to open up enough to be able to see colour and tone. I find because you're working on these type of in the light paintings of a late afternoon, the fleeting light doesn't last long. So to work on a small board is much more of an advantage than working over a large board. It's much easier to cover a small board than it is a big board. There's real magic to be found in these into the light subjects, especially in summertime, when the grass is golden, and you get that golden light effect screaming across the grasses, playing against shadows that are quite often in the mauves and purples, so you're getting these nice cool shadows against bright warm grass, quite magical stuff. The master, as far as I'm concerned, at capturing that was Elliot Gruner, and no better example of that is his famous painting Spring Frost, which depicts a farmer and his cattle with direct light screaming across, silhouetting the cattle and the farmer, but more so creating a magic amongst the light and the atmosphere, picking up all those beautiful rich colours in the grass.